Hello, my friends. Sorry I haven't been back online with another chapter. I had a bit of a croaky throat here, a little bit of a scratchy throat, but I'm getting better now. So I feel like I can read for another 45 minutes or an hour or so. So tonight we continue with Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Part 2, Chapter 10, The Submarine Coal Mines. The next day, the 20th of February, I woke very late. The fatigues of the previous night had prolonged my sleep until 11 o'clock. I dressed quickly and hastened to find the course of the Nautilus and where it was taking us. The instruments showed to be still toward the south, with a speed of 20 miles an hour and a depth of 50 fathoms. The species of fishes here did not differ much from those already noticed. There were rays of giant size, 5 yards long, and endowed with great muscular strength, which enabled them to shoot above the waves. Sharks of many kinds, amongst others, one 15 feet long, with triangular sharp teeth, and whose transparency rendered it almost invisible in the water. Amongst bony fish, Conseil noticed some about 3 yards long, armed with the upper jaw with a piercing sword. Other bright-colored creatures, known in the time of Aristotle by the name of the sea dragon, which are dangerous to capture on account of the spikes on their back. About 4 o'clock, the soil, generally composed of a thick mud mixture with petrified wood, changed by degrees, and it became more stony and seemed strewn with a conglomerate of pieces of basalt with a sprinkling of lava. I thought that a mountainous region was succeeding the long plains, and accordingly, after a few evolutions of the Nautilus, I saw the southerly horizon blocked by a high wall which seemed to close all exits. Its summit evidently passed the level of the ocean. It must be a continent, or at least an island, one of the Canaries, or of the Cape Verde Islands. The bearings not being yet taken, perhaps designedly, I was ignorant of our exact position. In any case, such a wall seemed to me to mark the limits of the Atlantis, of which we had in reality passed over the smallest part. Much longer should I have remained at the window admiring the beauties of the sea and sky, but the panels closed. At this moment, the Nautilus arrived at the site of this high, perpendicular wall. What it would do, I could not guess. I returned to my room. It no longer moved. I laid myself down with full intention of waking after a few hours. Sleep, but it was not. It was, in fact, 8 o'clock the next day when I entered the saloon. I looked at the manometer. It told me that the Nautilus was floating on the surface of the ocean. Besides, I heard footsteps on the platform. I went to the panel. It was open, but instead of broad daylight, as I expected, I was surrounded by profound darkness. Where were we? Was I mistaken? Was it still night? No, not a star was shining, and night has not that utter darkness. I knew not what to think, when a voice near me said, "Is that you, Professor?" "Ah, Captain," I answered. "Where are we?" "Underground, sir." "Underground!" I exclaimed. "And the Nautilus floating still?" "It always floats. But I do not understand." "Wait a few minutes. Our lantern will be lit, and if you like light places, you will be satisfied." I stood on the platform and waited. The darkness was so complete that I could not even see Captain Nemo, but looking to the zenith, exactly above my head, I seemed to catch an undecided gleam, a kind of twilight filling a circular globe. At this instant the lantern was lit, and its vividness dispelled the faint light. I closed my dazzled eyes for an instant and then looked again. The Nautilus was stationary, floating near a mountain, which formed a sort of quay. The lake, then supporting it, was a lake imprisoned by a circle of walls, measuring 2 miles in diameter and 6 in circumference. Its level, the manometer showed, could only be the same as the outside level, for there must necessarily be a communication between the lake and the sea. The high partitions leaning forward on their base grew into a vaulted roof bearing the shape of an immense funnel turned upside down, the height being about 500 or 600 yards. At the summit was a circular orifice, by which I had caught the slight gleam of light, evidently daylight. Where are we? I asked. In the very heart of an extinct volcano, the interior of which has been invaded by the sea, after some great convolution of the earth, whilst you were sleeping, Professor. The Nautilus penetrated to this lagoon by a natural canal, which opens about 10 yards beneath the surface of the ocean. This is its harbor, or refuge, a sure, commodious, and mysterious one, sheltered from all gales. Show me, if you can, on the coasts of any of our continents or islands, a road which can give such perfect refuge from all storms. Certainly, I replied. You are in safety here, Captain Nemo. Who could reach you in the heart of this volcano? But I did not see an opening at its summit. Yes, its crater, formerly filled with lava, vapor, and flames, and which now gives entrance to the life-giving air we breathe. But what is this volcanic mountain? It belongs to one of the numerous islands with which this sea is strewn. To vessels, a simple sandbank; to us, an immense cavern. Chance led me to discover it, and chance has served me well. But of what use is this refuge, Captain? The Nautilus wants no port. No, sir, but it wants electricity to make it move, and the wherewithal to make the electricity, sodium to feed the elements, coal from which to get the sodium, and a coal mine to supply the coal. And exactly on this spot the sea covers entire forests embedded during the geological periods, now mineralized and transformed into coal. For me, they are an inexhaustible mine. Your men follow the trade of miners here, then, Captain? Exactly so. These mines extend under the waves like mines of Newcastle. Here, in their diving dresses, pickaxe and shovel in hand, my men extract the coal, which I do not even ask, from the mines of the earth. When I burn this combustible for the manufacture of sodium, the smoke escapes from the crater of the mountain, gives it the appearance of a still active volcano. And we shall see your companions at work? No, not this time at least, for I am in a hurry to continue our submarine tour of the earth, so I shall content myself with drawing from the reserve of sodium I already possess. The time for loading is 1 day only, and we continue our voyage. So, if you wish to go over to the cavern and make the round of the lagoon, you must take advantage of today, Monsieur Arnaud. I thanked the captain and went to look for my companions, who had not yet left their cabin. I invited them to follow me without saying where we were. They mounted the platform. Conseil, who was astonished at nothing, seemed to look upon it as quite natural that he should awake under a mountain, after having fallen asleep under the waves. But Ned Land thought of nothing but finding whether the cavern had any exit. After breakfast, about 10 o'clock, we went down to the mountain. Here we are, once more on land, said Conseil. I do not call this land, said the Canadian, and besides, we are not on it, but beneath it. Between the walls of the mountain and the waters of the lake lay a sandy shore, which, at its greatest breadth, measured 500 feet. On this soil one might easily make the tour of the lake, but the base of the high partitions was stony ground, with volcanic blocks and enormous pumice stones lying in picturesque heaps. All these detached masses, covered with enamel, polished by action of the subterraneous fires, shone resplendent by the light of our electric lantern. The mica dust from the shore, rising under our feet, flew like clouds of sparks. The bottom now rose sensibly, and we soon arrived at long circuitous slopes, or inclined planes, which took us higher by degrees. But we were obliged to walk carefully among these conglomerates, bound by no cement, the feet slipping on the grassy crystal, feldspar, and quartz. The volcanic nature of this enormous evacuation was confirmed on all sides, and I pointed it out to my companions. Picture yourselves, said I, what this crater must have been like when filled with boiling lava, and when the level of the incandescent liquid rose to the orifice of the mountain, as though melted on top of a hot plate. I can picture it perfectly, said Conseil. But, sir, will you tell me why the great architect has suspended operations, and how it is the furnace is replaced by the quiet water of the lake? Most probably, Conseil, because some convulsion beneath the ocean produced that very opening which has served as a passage for the Nautilus. Then the waters of the Atlantic rushed into the interior of the mountain. There must have been a terrible struggle between the two elements, a struggle which ended with victory of Neptune. But many ages have run out since then, and the submerged volcano is now a peaceable grotto. Very well, replied Ned Land. I accept the explanation, sir, but in our interests, I regret that the opening of which you speak was not made above the level of the sea. But, friend Ned, said Conseil, if the passage had not been under the sea, the Nautilus could not have gone through it. We continued ascending. The steps became more and more perpendicular and narrow. Deep excavations, which were obliged to cross, cut them here and there. Sloping masses had to be turned. We slid upon our knees and crawled along, but Conseil's dexterity and the Canadian's strength surmounted all obstacles. At a height of about 31 feet, the nature of the ground changed without becoming more practicable. To the conglomerate, the trachyte, succeeded black basalt. The first disappeared in layers, full of bubbles, the latter forming regular prisms, placed in a colonnade supporting the spring of immense vault, an admirable specimen of natural architecture. Between the blocks of basalt wound long streams of lava, long grown cold, encrusted with bituminous rays, and in some places there were spread large carpets of sulfur. A more powerful light shone through the upper crater, shedding a vague glimmer of those volcanic depressions forever buried in the bosom of this extinguished mountain. But our upward march was soon stopped at a height of about 250 feet by impassable obstacles. There was complete vaulted arch overhanging us, and our ascent was changed to a circular walk. At the last change, vegetable life began to struggle with the mineral. Some shrubs, even some trees, grew from the fractures of the walls. I recognized some euphorbias with the caustic sugar coming from them. Heliotropes, quite incapable of justifying their name, sadly drooped their clusters of flowers, both their color and perfume half gone. Here and there some crystalline chrysanthemums grew timidly at the foot of an aloe with long, sickly-looking leaves. But beneath the streams of lava I saw some violets, still slightly perfumed, and I admit that I smelt them with delight. Perfume is the soul of the flower, and the sea flowers have no soul. We had arrived at the foot of some sturdy dragon trees, which had pushed aside rocks with their strong roots, when Ned Land exclaimed, "Ah, sir, a hive, a hive!" "A hive," I replied, with a gesture of incredulity. "Yes, a hive," repeated the Canadian, "and bees humming round it." I approached, and I was bound to believe my eyes. There, at the hole bored in one of the dragon trees, were some thousands of these ingenious insects, so common in all the Canaries, and whose produce is so much esteemed. Naturally enough, the Canadian wished to gather the honey, and I could not well oppose his wish. A quantity of dry leaves, mixed with sulfur, he lit with a spark from his flint, and he began to smoke out the bees. The humming ceased by degrees, and the hive eventually yielded several pounds of the sweetest honey, with which Ned Land filled his haversack. "When I have mixed this honey with the paste of the Archetoperus," said he, "I shall be able to offer you a succulent cake." "'Pon my word," said Conseil, "it will be gingerbread." "Never mind the gingerbread," said I. "Let us continue our interesting walk." At every turn of the path we were following, the lake appeared in its length and breadth. The lantern lit up the whole of its peaceable surface, which knew neither ripple nor wave. The Nautilus remained perfectly immovable. On the platform and on the mountain, the ship's crew were working like a black shadows, clearly carved against the luminous atmosphere. We were now going round the highest crest of the first layers of the rock which upheld the roof. I then saw that bees were not the only representatives of the animal kingdom in that interior of this volcano. Birds of prey hovered here and there in the shadows, or fled from their nests on top of the rocks. There were sparrowhawks with white breasts and kestrels, and down the slope scampered with their long legs several fine fat bustards. I leave anyone to imagine the covetousness of the Canadian at the sight of this savory game, and whether he did not regret having no gun. But he did his best to replace the lead by stones, and after several fruitless attempts, he succeeded in wounding a magnificent bird. To say that he risked his life 20 times before reaching it is but the truth. But he managed so well that the creature joined the honey cakes in his bag. We were now obliged to descend toward the shore, the crest becoming impracticable. Above us, the crater seemed to gape like a mouth of a well. From this place, the sky could be clearly seen, and clouds dissipated by the west wind, leaving behind them, even on the summit of this mountain, their misty remnants, certain proof that they were only moderately high. For the volcano did not rise more than 800 feet above the level of the ocean. Half an hour after the Canadians' last exploit, we regained the inner shore. Here the flora was represented by large carpets of marine crystal, a little umbelliferous plant, very good to pickle, which also bears the name of piercestone, and sea fennel. Conseil gathered some bundles of it. As to the fauna, it might be counted by thousands of crustacea of all sorts: lobsters, crabs, spider crabs, chameleon shrimp, and a large number of shells, rockfish, and limpets. 3/4 of an hour later, we had finished our circuitous walk and were on board. The crew had just finished loading the sodium, and the Nautilus could have left that instant, but Captain Nemo gave no order. Did he wish to wait until night and leave the submarine passage secretly? Perhaps so. Whatever it might be, the next day the Nautilus, having left its port, steered clear of all land at a few yards beneath the waves of the Atlantic. Chapter 11: The Sargasso Sea. That day the Nautilus crossed a singular part of the Atlantic Ocean. No one can be ignorant of the existence of the current of warm water known by the name of the Gulf Stream. After leaving the Gulf of Florida, we went in the direction of Spitzbergen, but before entering the Gulf of Mexico, about 45 degrees north latitude, this current divides into two arms, the principal one going towards the coast of Ireland and Norway, whilst the second bends to the south about the height of the Azores, then touching the African shore and describing a length oval, returns to the Antilles. The second arm, it is rather a collar than an arm, surrounds with its circles of warm water that portion of the cold, quiet, immovable ocean called the Sargasso Sea, a perfect lake in the open Atlantic. It takes no less than 3 years for the great current to pass round it. Such was the region the Nautilus was now visiting, a perfect meadow, a close carpet of seaweed, fucus, and tropical berries, so thick and so compact that the stem of a vessel could hardly tear its way through it. And Captain Nemo, not wishing to entangle his screw in the herbaceous mass, kept some yards beneath the surface of the waves. The name Sargasso comes from the Spanish word sargazo, which signifies kelp. This kelp, or berry plant, is the principal formation of this immense bank, and this is the reason why these plants unite in the peaceful basin of the Atlantic. The only explanation which can be given, he says, seems to me to result from the experience known to all the world. Place in a vase some fragments of cork or other floating body, and give it to the water in a vase in a circular movement. The scattered fragments will unite in a group in the center of the liquid surface. That is to say, in the part least agitated. In the phenomena we are now considering, the Atlantic is the vase, the Gulf Stream the circular current, and the Sargasso Sea the central point at which the floating bodies unite. I share Maury's opinion, and I was able to study the phenomena in the very midst where the vessels rarely penetrate. Above us floated products of all kinds, heaped up among the brownish plants, trunks of trees torn from the Andes or Rocky Mountains and floated by the Amazon or the Mississippi, numerous wrecks, remains of keels or ships' bottoms, side planks stove in, and so weighted with shells and branches that they could not rise again to the surface. And time one day justify Maury's other opinion, that these substances, thus accumulated for ages, will become petrified by the action of the water and will then form inexhaustible coal mines, a precious reserve prepared far-seeing nature for the moment when men shall have exhausted the mines on continents. In the midst of this inextricable mass of plants and seaweed, I noticed some charming pink halcyons and actinae with their long tentacles trailing after them, the medusae, green, red, and blue. All the day of the 22nd of February, we passed the Sargasso Sea, where such fish as the partial to marine plants find abundant nourishment. The next, the ocean had returned to its accustomed aspect. From this time, for 19 days, from the 23rd of February to the 12th of March, the Nautilus kept the middle of the Atlantic, carrying us at a constant speed of 100 leagues in 24 hours. Captain Nemo evidently intended accomplishing his submarine program, and I imagined that he intended, after doubling Cape Horn, to return to the Australian seas of the Pacific. Ned Land had cause for fear. In these large seas, void of islands, we could not attempt to leave the boat, nor had we any means of opposing Captain Nemo's will. Our only course was to submit, but what we could neither gain by force nor cunning, I liked to think we might be obtained by persuasion. This voyage ended, would he not consent to restore our liberty, under an oath never to reveal its existence, an oath of honor which we should have religiously kept? But we must consider that delicate question with the captain. But was I free to claim this liberty? Had he not himself said from the beginning, in the firmest manner, that the secrets of his life extracted from him our lasting imprisonment on board the Nautilus? And would not my 4 months' silence appear to him a tacit acceptance of our situation? And would not a return to the subject result in raising suspicions which might be hurtful to our projects? In at some future time, a favorable opportunity offered to return to them. During the 19 days mentioned above, no incident of any kind happened to signalize our voyage. I saw little of the captain. He was at work. In the library, I often found his books left open, especially those on natural history. My work on submarine depths, conned over him, was covered with marginal notes, often contradicting my theories and systems. But the captain contented himself with thus purging my work. It was very rare for him to discuss it with me. Sometimes I heard the melancholy tones of his organ, but only at night in the midst of the deepest obscurity, when the Nautilus slept upon the deserted ocean. During this part of our voyage we sailed whole days on the surface of the waves. The sea seemed abandoned. A few sailing vessels on the road to India were making for the Cape of Good Hope. One day we were followed by the boats of a whaler, who, no doubt, took us for some enormous whale of great price. But Captain Nemo did not wish the worthy fellows to lose their time and trouble, so he ended the chase by plunging underwater. Our navigation continued until the 13th of March. That day, the Nautilus was employed in taking soundings, which greatly interested me. We had then made about 13,000 leagues since our departure from the high seas of the Pacific. The bearings gave us 45 degrees, 37 south latitude, and 37.53 degrees west longitude. It was the same water in which Captain Denham of the Herald sounded 7,000 fathoms without finding the bottom. There, too, Lieutenant Parker of the American frigate Congress would not touch the bottom with 40,000 fathoms. Captain Nemo intended seeking the bottom of the ocean by a diagonal sufficiently lengthened by means of lateral planes placed at an angle of 45 degrees with the waterline of the Nautilus. Then the screw set to work at its maximum speed, its four blades beating the waves with indescribable force. I would say indescribable force. Under this powerful pressure, the hull of the Nautilus quivered like a sonorous cord and sank regularly under the water. At 7,000 fathoms, I saw some blackish tops rising from the midst of the waters, but these summits might belong to high mountains, like in the Himalayas or Mont Blanc, or even higher, and the depths of the abyss remained incalculable. The Nautilus descended still lower. In spite of the great pressure, I felt the steel plates tremble at the fastenings of the bolts. Its bars bent, its partitions groaned. The windows of the saloon seemed to curve under the pressure of the waters, and this firm structure would doubtless have yielded if, as its captain had said, it had not been capable of resistance like a solid block. We attained a depth of 16,000 yards, 4 leagues, and the sides of the Nautilus then bore a pressure of 1,600 atmospheres, that is to say, 3,200 pounds, to each square 2/5 of an inch of its surface. What a situation to be in, I exclaimed, to overrun these deep regions where man has never trod. Look, Captain, look at these magnificent rocks, these uninhabited grottos, these lowest receptacles of the globe, where life is no longer possible. What unknown sights are here? Why should we be unable to preserve a remembrance of them? Would you like to carry away more than the remembrance? Said Captain Nemo. What do you mean by these words? I mean to say that nothing is easier than to make a photographic view of this submarine region. I had not the time to express my surprise at this new proposition when, at Captain Nemo's call, an objective was brought into the saloon. Through the wieldily opened panel, the liquid mass was bright with electricity, which was distributed with such uniformity that not a shadow, not a gradation, was to be seen in our manufactured light. The Nautilus remained motionless. The force of its screw, subdued by the inclination of its planes, the instrument was propped on the bottom of the oceanic sight, and in a few seconds we'd obtained a perfect negative. But the operation being over, Captain Nemo said, "Let us go up. We must not abuse our position, nor expose the Nautilus too long to such great pressure." "Go up again?" I exclaimed. "Hold well on." I had not time to understand why Captain Nemo cautioned me thus. When I was thrown forward on the carpet, at a signal from the captain, its screw was shipped, and its blaze raised vertically. The Nautilus shot into the air like a balloon, rising with stunning rapidity and cutting the mass of the waters with a sonorous agitation. Nothing was visible, and in 4 minutes it had shot through the 4 leagues which separated it from the ocean, and after emerging like a flying fish, fell, making the waves rebound to an enormous height. Chapter 12: Cachalots and Whales. During the nights of the 13th and 14th of March, the Nautilus returned to its southerly course. I fancied that, when on a level with Cape Horn, he would turn the helm westward in order to beat the Pacific seas and so complete the tour of the world. He did nothing of the kind, but continued on his way to the southern regions. Where was he going? To the pole? It was madness. I began to think that the captain's temerity justified Ned Land's fears. For some time past, the Canadian had not spoken to me of his projects of flight. He was less communicative, almost silent. I could see that his lengthened imprisonment was weighing upon him, and I felt that rage was burning within him. When he met the captain, his eyes lit up with suppressed anger, and I feared that his natural violence would lead him into some extreme. That day, the 14th of March, Conseil and he came to my room. I inquired the cause of their visit. "A simple question to ask you, sir," replied the Canadian. "Speak, Ned. How many men are there on board the Nautilus, do you think?" "I cannot tell, my friend." "I should say that its working does not require a large crew." "Certainly, under existing conditions, 10 men, at most, ought to be enough." "Well, why should there be any more?" "Why," I replied, looking fixedly at Ned Land, whose meaning was easy to guess, "because," I added, "if my surmises are correct, and if I have well understood Captain's existence, the Nautilus is not only a vessel, it is also a place of refuge for those who, like its commander, have broken every tie upon earth." "Perhaps so," said Conseil, "but in any case, the Nautilus can only contain a certain number of men. Could not you, sir, estimate their maximum?" "How, Conseil?" "By calculation, given the size of the vessel, which you know, sir, and consequently the quantity of air it contains. Knowing also how much each man expends at breath, comparing these results with the facts that the Nautilus is obliged to go to the surface every 24 hours. Conseil had not finished the sentence before I saw what he was driving at. "I understand," said I. "But that calculation, though simple enough, can give but a very uncertain result." "Never mind," said Ned Land urgently. "Here it is." Then I said, "In 1 hour, each man consumes the oxygen contained in 20 gallons of air, and in 24 that contained in 480 gallons. We must therefore find how many times 480 gallons of air the Nautilus contains." "Just so," said Conseil. "Or," I continued, "the size of the Nautilus being 1,500 tons, and 1 ton holding 200 gallons, it contains 300,000 gallons of air, which, divided by 480, gives a quotient of 625. Which means to say, strictly speaking, that the air contained in the Nautilus would suffice for 625 men for 24 hours. 625, repeated Ned. "But remember that all of us, passengers, sailors, officers included, would not form a 10th part of that number." "Still, so many for 3 men," murmured Conseil. The Canadian shook his head, passed his hand across his forehead, and left the room without answering. "Will you allow me to make one observation, sir?" said Conseil. "Poor Ned is longing for everything that he cannot have. His past life is always present to him. Everything we are forbidden he regrets. His head is full of old recollections, and we must understand him. What he has to do here? Nothing. He has not learned like you, sir, and has not the same taste for the beauties of the sea that we have. He would risk everything to be able to go once more into a tavern in his own country. Certainly, the monotony on board must seem intolerable to the Canadian, accustomed as he was to a life of liberty and activity. Events were rare which would rouse him to any show of spirit. But that day an event did happen, which recalled the bright days of the harpooner. About 11 in the morning, being on the surface of the ocean, Nautilus fell in with a troop of whales, an encounter which did not astonish me, knowing that these creatures, hunted to death, had taken refuge in high latitudes. We were seated on the platform, with a quiet sea. The month of October in the latitudes gave us some lovely autumnal days. It was the Canadian, he could not be mistaken, who signaled a whale on the eastern horizon. Looking attentively, one might see its black back rise and fall with the waves 5 minutes from the Nautilus. Ah! Exclaimed Ned Land. If I was on board a whaler, now such a meeting would give me pleasure. It is one of large size. See with what strength it blow holes throw up columns of air and steam. Confound it, why am I bound to these steel plates? What, Ned? Said I. You have forgotten your old ideas of fishing? Can a whale fisher ever forget his old trade, sir? Can he ever tire of the emotions caused by such a chase? You have never fished in these seas, Ned. Never, sir. In the northern only, and as much in Bering as in Davis Straits. Then the southern whale is still unknown to you. It is the Greenland whale you have hunted up to this time, and that would not risk passing through the warm waters of the equator. Whales are localized, according to their kinds, in certain seas which they never leave, and if one of these creatures went from the Bering to the Davis Straits, it must simply be because there is a passage from one sea to the other, either on the American or the Asiatic side. In that case, as I have never fished in these seas, I do not know the kind of whale frequenting them. I have told you, Ned. A greater reason for making their acquaintance, said Conseil. Look, look, exclaimed the Canadian. They approach. They aggravate me. They know I cannot get at them. Ned stamped his feet. His hand trembled as he grasped an imaginary harpoon. Are these cetaceans as large as those in the northern seas? Asked he. Very nearly, Ned, because I have seen large whales, sir, whales measuring 100 feet. I have even been told that those of Hulamok and Umgalek of the Aleutian Islands are sometimes 150 feet long. That seems to me an exaggeration. These creatures are only Ballipterans, provided with dorsal fins, and, like the cachalots, are generally much smaller than the Greenland whale. Ah, exclaimed the Canadian, whose eyes had never left the ocean. They are coming nearer. They are in the same water as the Nautilus. Then, returning to the conversation, he said, You spoke of the cachalot as a small creature. I have heard of gigantic ones. They are intelligent cetacea. It is said of some that they cover themselves with seaweed and fucus, and then are taken for islands. People encamp upon them and settle there, lights a fire, and build houses, said Conseil. Yes, Joker, said Ned Land, and one day the creature plunges, carrying with it all the inhabitants to the bottom of the sea. Something like the travels of Sinbad the Sailor, I replied, laughing. Ah, suddenly, exclaimed Ned Land, it's not one whale. There are 10. There are 20. It is a whole troop, and I am not able to do anything, hands and feet tied. But friend Ned, said Conseil, why do you not ask Captain Nemo's permission to chase them? Conseil had not finished his sentence when Ned had lowered himself through the panel to seek the captain. A few minutes afterwards, the two appeared together on the platform. Captain Nemo watched as the troop of cetacea playing on the waters about a mile from the Nautilus. They are southern whales, said he. There goes the fortune of a whole fleet of whalers. Well, sir, asked the Canadian, can I not chase them, if only to remind me of my old trade of harpooners? And to what purpose, replied Captain Nemo. Only to destroy. We have nothing to do with the whale oil on board. We don't use it. But, sir, continued the Canadian, in the Red Sea you allowed us to follow the dugong. Then it was to procure fresh meat for my crew. Here it would be killing for killing's sake. I know that is a privilege reserved for man, but I do not approve of such murderous pastimes. In destroying the southern whale, like the Greenland whale, an inoffensive creature, your traders do a culpable action. Master Land. They have already depopulated the whole Baffin's Bay and are annihilating a class of useful animals. Leave the unfortunate cetacea alone. They have plenty of natural enemies, cachalots, swordfish, and sawfish. without you troubling them. The captain was right. The barbarous and inconsiderate greed of these fishermen will one day cause the disappearance of the last whale in the ocean. Ned Land whistled Yankee Doodle between his teeth, thrust his hands into his pockets, and turned his back upon us. But Captain Nemo watched the troop of cetacea, and addressing me, said, "I was right in saying the whales had natural enemies enough, without counting man. These will have plenty to do before long. Do you see, Monsieur Arnaud? About 8 miles to leeward, those blackish moving points?" "Yes, Captain," I replied. "Those are cachalots, terrible animals, which I have met in troops of 200 and 300. As to those, they are cruel, mischievous creatures. They would be right in exterminating them. We would be right in exterminating them." The Canadian turned quickly at his last words. "Well, Captain," said he, "it is still time, in the interest of the whales. It is useless to expose oneself, Professor. The Nautilus will disperse them. It is armed with steel spurs, as good as Master Land's harpoon, I imagine." The Canadian did not put himself out enough to shrug his shoulders. Attack cetacea without blows of a spur? Who had ever heard of such a thing? "Wait, Monsieur Arnaud," said Captain Nemo. "We will show you something you have never seen. We have no pity for those ferocious creatures. They are nothing but moth and teeth. Mouth and teeth. Mouth and teeth. No one could better describe the Macrophilus cachalot, which is sometimes more than 70 feet long. Its enormous head occupies 1/3 of its entire body. Better armed than a whale, whose upper jaw is furnished with a whalebone, and only a whalebone, it is supplied with 25 large tusks, about 8 inches long, cylindrical and conical at top, each weighing 2 pounds. It is in the upper part of its enormous head, in great cavities divided by cartilages, that is to be found from 600 to 800 pounds of precious oil, called spermaceti. The cachalot is a disagreeable creature, more tadpole than fish, according to Fredol's description. It is badly formed, the whole of its left side being, if we may say it, a failure, and being only able to see with its right eye. But the formidable troop was nearing us. They had seen the whales and were preparing to attack them. One could judge beforehand that the cachalots would be victorious, not only because they were better built for attack than their inoffensive adversaries, but also because they could remain longer underwater without coming to the surface. There was only just time to go help the whales. The Nautilus went under the water. Conseil, Ned Land, and I took our places before the window in the saloon. The Captain Nemo joined the pilot in his cage to work apparatus as the engine of destruction. Soon I felt the beatings of the screw quicken, and our speed increased. The battle between the cachalots and the whales had already begun when the Nautilus arrived. They did not at first show any fear at the sight of this new monster joining the conflict, but they soon had to guard against its blows. What a battle! The Nautilus was nothing but a formidable harpoon, brandished by the hand of Captain Nemo. It hurled itself against the fleshy mass, passing through from one part to the other, leaving behind it 2 quivering halves of an animal. It could not feel the formidable blows from their tails upon its sides, nor the shock which it produced itself much more. The cachalot killed, it ran at the next, tackled on the spot, that it might not miss its prey, going forwards and backwards, answering to its helm, plunging when the cetacean dived into the deep waters, coming up with it and return to the surface, striking it front or sideways, cutting or tearing in all directions and at any pace, piercing it with terrible spur. What carnage! What a noise on the surface of the waves! What sharp hissing, and what snorting peculiar to these enlarged animals! In the midst of these waters, generally so peaceful, their tails made perfect billows. For 1 hour this wholesale massacre continued. from which the Chaklots could not escape. Several times, 10 or 12 united and tried to rush the Nautilus by their weight. From the window, we could see their enormous mouths studded with tusks and their formidable eyes. Ned Land could not contain himself. He threatened and swore at them. He could not feel them clinging to our vessel like dogs worrying a wild boar in a corpse. But he could feel them. We thought he could not, but in fact, for Ned, he could. He felt them. But the Nautilus, working its screw, carried them here and there, or to the upper levels of the ocean, without caring for their enormous weight, nor the power strain on the vessel. At length, the mass of Chaklots broke up. The waves became quiet, and I felt that we were rising to the surface. The panel opened, and we hurried to the platform. The sea was covered with mutated bodies. A formidable explosion could not have divided and torn this fleshy mass with more violence. We were floating amid gigantic bodies, bluish on the back and white underneath, covered with enormous protuberances. Some terrified Chalots were flying towards the horizon. The waves were dyed red for several miles. The Nautilus flowed in the sea of blood. Captain Nemo joined us. "Well, Master Land," said he. "Well, sir," replied the Canadian, whose enthusiasm had somewhat calmed. "It is a terrible spectacle, certainly, but I am not a butcher. I am a hunter, and I call this a butchery." "It is a massacre of mischievous creatures," replied the captain, "and the Nautilus is not a butcher's knife." "I like my harpoon better," said the Canadian. "Every one to his own," answered the captain, looking fixedly at Ned Land. I feared he would commit some act of violence which would end in a sad consequence, but his anger was turned by the sight of a whale which the Nautilus had just come up with. The creature had not quite escaped from the Chaklots' teeth. I recognized the southern whale by its flat head, which is entirely black. Anatomically, it is distinguished from the white whale and the North Cape whale by the 7 cervical vertebrae, and it has 2 more ribs than the congeners. The unfortunate cetacean was lying on its side, riddled with holes from bites, and quite dead. From its mutated fins still hung a young whale, which it could not save from the massacre. Its mouth let the water flow in and out, murmuring like the waves breaking on the shore. Captain Nemo steered close to the corpse of the creature. 2 of its men mounted its side, and I saw, not without surprise, that they were drawing from its breasts all the milk which they contained. That is to say, about 2 or 3 tons. The captain offered me a cup of the milk, which was still warm. I could not help showing my repugnance to the drink, but he assured me it was excellent and not to be distinguished from cow's milk. I tasted it and was of his opinion. It was useful and a nice reserve for us, for in the shape of salt butter or cheese, it would form an agreeable variety from our ordinary food. From that day, I noticed with uneasiness that Ned Land's ill will towards Captain Nemo increased, and I resolved to watch the Canadian's gestures closely. And that, my friends, is all we have time for tonight. I will try to read some more over the weekend and get some more chapters recorded and uploaded for you for next week. Thank you very much for listening and watching. This has been Indiana Homes. Have a good weekend.